I mean, I'm kind of like just taken aback by a lot of this because a lot of it is new for me. But it's just just hearing how somebody thinks about music and the kind of decisions you have to make going into creating a piece of art. It's just kind of like that's a lot.
So this was for me a big realization. Yeah, during the years, that basically sound design and composition and mixing is basically the same thing, or like they are all connected. So if you make the right decisions, then you already solved 90% of your mixing and sound design problems, and also like basically as a songwriter you also accomplished what you wanted to do. So basically if you
I'm curious if you can elaborate on this, please.
yeah. So let's say if you wanna create a string accompaniment, like in English.
Accompaniment, yeah.
Accompaniment, yeah. By a string quartet, which is like a very typical thing, you know, like you wanna use them to play in the background. Then what you would do, obviously, the best way to do is find a violin. So I know it sounds obvious, but for example, if you want to make a melody, then the best way to approach it is how we hear, yeah, how our body works, our ears, our brain, the physical reality, the rules of physics, basically. How sound spreads and how we actually hear it, and which frequencies we hear and which frequencies we sensitive to and not too sensitive to, because there are also things we hear but we don't actually hear it differently. So it depends on the frequency. So for example, if you want to create a melody, you need to know that human hearing is the most sensitive for around between 500 and 5,000, something like this, hertz.
Okay, no.
And this means, and it's the reason of it is because the human voice is in this range.
Right. Okay.
So when you speak to me, I can distinguish different letters and sounds. So that's speech. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's actually a very complex thing to do. It's extremely complex what you hear and what you create with your mouth. But if you do it, if you would, let's say you are able to do it, let's say 4 octaves lower, so it would be a very low frequency. I wouldn't hear it because my ears cannot hear that frequency anymore. I might hear some very low mumbling, but I
wouldn't be able to make out the words.
Yeah. So for example, if you let's say play a note around 1000 hertz, and then you play, let's say this is a C, and then you play a D, which is 1 note higher, yeah. You would hear the difference. Anyone would hear the difference. You don't need to be a musician to hear the difference. But if you do it around 10,000 hertz, it would just sound like something like a very high pitched noise, like this, something like this. And if you just play play a C and a D, you would not hear any difference between the two, because we actually hear
becomes blurry, you're saying.
Yeah. So this is parabolic, I think, or no, maybe exponential. Yeah. So you hear quite drastic differences. So here, most of the details within this range, which is 500, 5,000, around that. Below that, those are the bass sounds. Below 100 hertz, those are the sub-bass sounds. And those are very low, so you don't really hear the pitch anymore. So the actual note, which note you play, but you hear this brutal bass. But it's also a physical phenomenon.
Yeah.
Because you can only hear that bass if you have a certain speaker that can create that frequency. So you need to resonate the air, which is the transition material or something like this. You know, that transfer the waves. Basically. You need to make them resonate, so you need to build a proper device for that, which is like it needs to be a certain kind of speaker, so it needs to actually reach a certain size even to be able to create that big waves, because when we are talking about, let's say, 40 hertz, you can still hear it, although you barely hear anything. Well, if you can actually create that waves in a big decibel, so it's like a relatively big loudness, then you would hear those massive bass lines, like very, very deep sounds. You wouldn't be able to hear a pitch of it maybe anymore, but you would hear. But this is something that in music production, for example, extremely important, those frequencies, or how
I'm getting a biology physics lesson as well as, I mean, yeah, music's a lot of it is physics of sound, right?
Exactly, yeah. So basically, when it comes to sound design and composition and mixing, if you, let's say, want to write a melody, so you choose the right instrument for that, which can be a trumpet or a saxophone, because those instruments were designed to have to like their sound is in the similar range than human voice. Especially saxophone is like almost the same, and that's why we like it so much, because it's actually very similar to human voice.
Yeah, that's true.
And you can also play with the pitch similar to a human voice. Yeah. So it's actually one of the reasons. And trumpet is also a similar instrument, and violin, and there are some other instruments, but there are also other instruments that are in different ranges, like let's say piccolo, which is similar to flute, but it's very high.
Yeah.
It's like a sopran flute, kind of.
Yeah.
And you would not choose that to play the main melody, but it's a very good extra layer, for example. Or if you want to create something, something that fits to that emotion, then you can use these instruments for certain things. Or if you want to create a bass role in your music, which is important in composition, obviously, then you would just use a tuba. I just told you an example, which is a brass instrument, but the bass brass instrument.
So what you're telling me is
and
that
then if you just make the right decisions, then you basically already solved most of your problems. So
I was gonna say, like, all of these calculations are something you have to have in mind when sitting down to, like, I'm gonna create a piece of music. All of it. Damn, music is hard.
I mean, it's a complex process to.
But then some of it we do it instinctively as well, I'm guessing, because I know musicians that would not necessarily be able to, read sheet of music, but they'll be like, yeah, but I know what I would like this instrument here because it sounds nice, or I would like that instrument there. We might not be able to break it down as technically as you just have.
Yeah, but you're gonna end up having lots of issues if you don't think about these things eventually. So, for example, what I mean by this is, yes, you might be an amazing guitar player, and you can play really cool stuff, and you have some crazy pedals with lots of like amazing effects and stuff.
Yeah.
They sound amazing when you play them by themselves. But then you play, let's say, 3-4 different kind of things with each other. So they all, in your head, they all oh yes, this is good. Anyway, sorry. So they all belong together in one song, let's say, because you said it, because you are the creator. But in reality, from a mixing perspective, let's say they are in a similar frequency range. They are actually covering each other. So let's say if you have a melody, let's say, and in the same height, you have another melody, which is almost the same, but in the same
Slight,
frequency
yeah.
range, and if you play them together, they cover each other. You don't want to use
you
the
might create-
same kind of role in the same song because you already have something for that role, you know?
Okay.
So
Okay.
let's say you want to have a bass instrument, you don't need two.
Mm.
This is the idea basically. So if you want to make a good bass line, you should play deep. Like you should play somewhere between the first octave and the second, or like the zero and the second, or something like this. It depends on what you want to create exactly. But this is the idea, because especially in electronic music, people tend to overcomplicate this whole mixing sound design thing, that they use all those effects and all those softwares you have, but in reality you actually don't need most of those things in most of the times, because you just, if you create that sound and that instrument for that role, which is, let's say, playing the melody in the middle, then it's gonna be fine, and you barely need to put any kind of effects, or like not effects, but like you barely need any serious post processing, as we say, or like dynamic processing and like all these things.
Yeah.
If it's already working.
I mean, I'm kind of like just taken aback by a lot of this because a lot of it is new for me. But it's just just hearing how somebody thinks about music and the kind of decisions you have to make going into creating a piece of art. It's just kind of like, that's a lot.
Yeah.
A lot to be aware
It's
of.
very technical because if you are a music producer, you are an engineer, you are a composer, you are everyone. You are everyone in one person.
Biologist and a physicist apparently as well.
What I cannot do, I'm never going to be the one of those singers on the stage who can, sell the track basically, or give that one extra layer that makes it potentially popular among people, the human factor basically.
So you're saying is you're not going to be drunk in a tent at 6 a.m. fighting at a taxi driver?
No chance, no. or I'm never going to play certain instruments, but I can be the person who records those instruments and put them in the right place, in the right way. So This is why I'm saying that being a music producer is like, for me at least, is more about the whole music and
the whole piece together.
and
how it comes together.
And that's why for me it's never been about my own ego. That I always felt that I want to express something, of course, because I wouldn't create otherwise. But when it came to that point, when I need to show my face and then, let's make photo shootings and like being cool and shit, I'm like, I just want to make music, So I realized that maybe I should focus more on engineering and try to basically offer people the solution for these kind of technical problems. Because many people are struggling with these things because they just simply never, they're just not there yet, they just never reached that information or level of whatever, but they already write amazing songs, for example. So they are really good songwriters or playing instruments very well, or very talented singers or whatever, but they have zero idea about all these things that I was just talking about, which is very common. So this is
you're providing a very
So this is the place I decided to be in this whole thing, that being the person who is in the background, and I just want to make sure that everything is perfect in the end,
You're a wizard.
So if you give me something that potentially great, but it's a piece of shit, how it sounds and everything is bad, and you just don't understand anything anymore, and you are confused, because every artist is there in the stage, then I will just fix it for you. Basically, this is the idea.
All right. So you're a wizard of sound. That's pretty.
I mean, you can say that.